got Jess that are about to swivel on their cameras and join us in a second. But we're gonna dig even deeper. You know, that a lot of their work leans right into Black and brown communities. And you know, at full disclosure, you know, I was awarded by them for the work I've been doing in tech 2 short years ago, as an innovator and disruptor in the technology space as an entrepreneur. And that award was given to me by, at the time, New York on Tech and NBC Universal, and now they're America on Tech, because Jess and Evin just keep growing. So I'm super hyped to have you guys here today. It's always a great energy when I see you guys. And so thanks for joining in the WIL Take Ownership podcast and GA.
Thanks for having us, Ofo. We're really happy to be here.
Yes, thanks, Ofo. Thanks for having us. Great to see you. And hey, Tom.
Hey.
Awesome. Well, you guys, people at home, these two are in Los Angeles. They're in New York City. You know, we're just bridging the gap right now, doing it digitally like we've all been doing the last several months. But I want to talk to you guys first to learn, how did America on Tech start? Like, what was the impetus or the nugget for the idea? And I'll throw it to you first, Jess. How did America on Tech start?
Yeah, so America on Tech really came from a place of wanting to serve. What we do is, I should start off with that. We're an early pipeline technology talent accelerator that's on a mission to prepare the next generation of technology leaders. And we can talk more about what that looks like later on. But, you know, before America on Tech started, Evin and I, we share very similar educational backgrounds, personal backgrounds. We're both from East New York, Brooklyn. Born and raised, super proud of that. And we were also the first people in our family to go to college, obtain a degree in technology, start our careers in the industry. And I think it became very clear to us as first generation in our family to go off into the private sector and work in a space like tech that not many of us looked like us on our tech teams, right? Oftentimes for me, I was the only woman, the only person of color. I think for Evin, he was oftentimes the only man of color on his teams. And I think that informed us of, obviously there was a huge gap between where we were in our careers and then also, you know, where we were from. And a lot of times when we talk about talent in this space, we talk about it from a deficit mindset, like, oh, there's not enough talent. You know, we can't find the talent. And I think for me and for Evin, having grown up in Brooklyn, we have access to so many talented Black and brown people and Black and brown young people specifically, that we couldn't fathom the idea that we were not being seen. And so as a result of that, you know, one Labor Day weekend on Starbucks napkins in 2014, Evin and I crafted a master plan to bring technology education to students in Brooklyn, New York. We started off with a pilot of 20 students that year, and then from there, we've just kept growing the organization. We used to be Brooklyn on Tech, we grew to New York on Tech, and now we're America on Tech with offices in New York and LA. Have learned a tremendous amount of things about what tech looks like, not only in New York City, but in Los Angeles, and how, you know, the landscape just changes. The technology ecosystem and landscape just changes based on geography. I'm happy to share more about that later on in the presentation, but that's our origin story. And it's been a tremendous 6 years doing this work.
No, that's truly amazing work that you guys have been doing. And, you know, I've gotten, you know, introduced to a lot of whether it's the students that you guys work with, or invited to just come and see them, you know, kind of move from the program and go into the next stage of their lives, and they get their awards and all kinds of stuff. You know, Evin, to you know, what were some of the early stories that you saw that made you realize, no, this is really working? Like, the time and commitment we're putting in is paying off for these kids.
Yeah, I think that's a great question on Ofo. You know, to kind of piggyback first off of Jessica and then segue into that, you know, America on Tech really came as a passion and labor of love. Like, before we started, I was literally walking around in neighborhoods handing out flyers for students to apply to the program. I was going to local high schools. I was going to barbershops. I was going to the check cashing place. I was going to laundromats. I was getting in arguments with people while I was putting up signs, the whole nine. And so it was really a grassroots effort that really led up to this national organization that we're leading now. And to kind of talk about, you know, some of the pivotal moments of like seeing success very early on was, you know, we always, it's not unknown that most people are just consumers of technology and not a lot of creators of technology. And that was one of the biggest gaps that we wanted to address for the students that we were working with. Was like, hey, you're on Instagram all day, you're on Twitter all day, you're on Facebook, you're on all these social media sites, you're on this website, you're accessing information from here. But how about we show you how to actually be the creator of of everything, right? Of anything that you want to create. And the aha moments, I would say initially, is when we seen students successfully completing the projects that we had in class. So we are a project-based kind of course. And so when we seen students initially successfully completing the projects, that was the first green light of like, okay, we're on to something, and we can actually train students and give them the skills that they need to actually develop awesome products. And then I would say the second phase is when Jessica and I started to realize, okay, instead of just only focusing on like producing portfolio work, how about we take it up a notch and say, how do we now get the students paid opportunities? And these came in the forms of internships and apprenticeships. And then we started to see our students being successful in internships and jobs. And then that was the big, green light for us to show that like, what we're doing can actually have a lasting and long impact on the lives of the students that we wanted to serve. And so I would say, Jessica and I all the time get emails from alumni and current students of just saying thank you. And I would say out of all, the stressful times that come along with like being a founder of an organization, that's that small thank you that you get in an email or in a text message from a student that is either going through your program currently or an alumni of your program makes a world of a difference, especially as you're navigating and growing your organization.
No, for sure. I love hearing the origin stories, the imagery of the grassroots piece, going to different doors, going to the check cashing place, wherever it was. I remember in the very early days of WYL, going around with team members, and we would just canvas neighborhoods. We had these doorknob, hangers, which we felt like was so, so smart, so brilliant, because we were housing, right? So the little doorknob hangers, we would go around in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, hang them up on people's doors, and it would say, "Rate your landlord." And what's funny about it is we come outside days later and we see them flying all over the neighborhood and stuff. But you have to do that grunt work. A lot of it's not scalable in the beginning, but you do it because, people, it's like the idea of if your car, kirks out and you're on the side of the road, like nobody just gets out of their car and helps you move a car that's just sitting there. But if they see you pushing it, the idea is, oh, let me help that person push the car, right? Mm-hmm. So I love that energy and that fervency, like very early on. When you think about the skills gap, obviously you're addressing a huge problem here, right? Like I mentioned with Tom, the CEO of Wells Fargo said last week, effectively being like, it's hard to find Black talent, right? Which would then lead to many Black people closing their Wells Fargo accounts and taking their business elsewhere. But for you guys, and thinking about, that's the skills gap or the opportunities gap, these two things that kind of work together. How do you assess that for the students you work with? Like, is a lot of the work you guys do focusing on, placement, or do you find that still, no matter what, the root is the skills, and then from there, placement is secondary? How do you guys, think through that? And I'll just lob that one up to either of you.
Jess, you want to take that, and I'm happy to jump in after you.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really important to note that America on Tech only works with low to moderate income populations, right? So our students, they're living in low income communities. They're attending schools that are severely underfunded, and they have all of the passions in the world to want to make it and to want to, pursue strong careers. But unfortunately, given the circumstances that they were born into, or the neighborhoods that they're from, or the zip codes that, they live in, a lot of times those opportunities are far and few between. And when I think about, our work, there are two things that really come to mind. One, there's a statistic that says 77% of jobs within the next 5 years are going to require technical skills, and that 65% of Generation Z is going to hold jobs that have not even been invented yet. And so if that is the case, right, and that affects our overall population in the United States overall, that means that it's going to disproportionately affect the students that we're working with, right, who oftentimes don't have computer science education in their classrooms. When they do have computer science education, it's not always industry aligned. They can't get jobs afterwards. When they do have access to professional development opportunities, it's not intersectional professional development, right? We're talking to them about how to, craft a resume and maybe, how to interview appropriately for a job opportunity, but we're not talking about what it's like to do that as a Black or a brown person. And so I already think that at the end of the day, our students are going to be disproportionately affected by automation. They're going to be disproportionately affected by the amounts of jobs that are going to just be displaced. And also, they've already been disproportionately affected by the things like COVID-19, and have always historically been oppressed because of things like racial injustice and economic injustices living in their communities. And so I want to say that because I think it informs everyone of the kinds of challenges that make skills attainment really difficult, right? Like if I'm thinking about how to put food on my table, if I'm trying to figure out where my mom is because I haven't seen her all day, and I'm trying to figure out, how, I'm gonna apply to college, or how I'm going to pay for this after school program, then there's a possibility that skills won't ever be developed, right? And so the way that we see our work is very much about a holistic approach to a student, right? We don't just teach students how to code at America on Tech. We're not just teaching them about UX design or product or data or cybersecurity, right? For us, the core components of our programs are really informed by how do you actually invest in the whole child, right? Because it does take a village to raise one. And the way that we do our work is like, we're trying to accomplish 4 things with them. One, we're trying to provide them with the development on the technical side, but we're also trying to align them with mentors in the field. We're also trying to make sure that we are aligning them with employers and hiring managers. And we're also trying to make sure that we are placing them in internships and jobs that show that they can actually succeed in this industry. Outside of those 4 outcomes of how we actually measure the success of our programs, though, we're also educating parents, right? So that they ensure that they are creating conditions to support computer science and technology education in the home. We're also working with teachers to make sure that they have the capacity, if they wanted to access our curriculums and get that into the hands of students that we can't always serve given the capacity of our programs. And we're also making sure that we are we're sitting at tables when advocacy comes around, when we're actually trying to make sure that the voices of young people are part of the solutions that our government and our public entities are actually developing in the process. And so I actually find it hard sometimes to talk about the skills gap without talking about the opportunity gap, without talking about all of the things that make these things hard to do, because we think sometimes that it's just a matter of training students and then they should be okay if they get a job. But that's not the case, especially with our students who have various levels of oppressions that they're dealing with on a daily basis that make it doubly difficult, like even quadruple. And granted, these are not even real words, but like 4 or 5 times more hard to even get a seat at the table. So.
Oh, God.
I want you to answer that too, but I want to ask, because in hearing Jessica, in hearing you talk about that, what I initially think about is like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like the basic things we need to survive as human beings, and when they're not being met, it's unconscionable to think that we would be able to focus without those needs being met. So, Tom talked earlier at GA about mindset shift, right? And I think, there's all these oppressive forces against these children, against their families that are working without sometimes them even seeing them. And I want you maybe to address this too, Ev. How do you guys go about shifting the mindset to realize, like, understanding, a lot of what you're talking about is survival. Like we need to survive before anything else is layered on top of that, right? But how do you, inform these students and their parents that, keeping up is survival? Like if they're not plugged into technology, if they're not able to land these jobs that can create even sustaining capital before wealth, like this is survival too. Maybe layer that into your answer as well, Ev. But how do you guys address that?
Yeah, certainly. So I would say the first thing that we do when it comes to educating the parents, or not educating, I don't like to use the word educating, informing the parents, and then also informing the students and exposing them to what we are trying to show them is data, right? So before programs kick off, we have parent orientation. Before student programs kick off, we have student orientation. And those student orientations are not just onboarding. It's also an information session where we're going over stats and statistics in regards to employment rates, salaries, for current state to future state. So we're really trying to inform them, but also putting in a visual perspective while learning certain skill sets, both hard and soft, are critical to one's current state and future state, right? And I think from there, that's when you allow the individual to make an informed decision and to find their own intrinsic motivation to want to learn the content that you're going to put in front of them. And so we are very, very intentional about making sure that we don't just teach the skills up front, but we're giving the individual, either the parent, the student, or whatever the stakeholder is that's in front of us, the information needed first before we deploy the content that we've developed that's going to inform and uplift. And so I would say that's what we first do. And then secondly, I would say, what we were also mentioning in your statement was like, this is survival, right? And kind of to pivot the conversation just a tad is a lot of the times when we talk about our community, we're at a point now where people will say like, oh, this individual had the skills, but they just weren't a culture fit, right? And I think what we've learned is that we're now teaching students skills, but on the other end, what we're teaching students is how to be adaptable, right? But how to be adaptable without losing yourself. And I think that's very important because a lot of people sometimes approach adaptability as one of conforming and forgetting who they are. And as a result, that's when you start feeling lost within this ecosystem that you're trying to navigate. And so when we're talking to students, we're approaching it to them from the sense of like, hey, you are who you are. And the reality of this world is that there are going to be people that appreciate your uniqueness, and there are going to be people that do not appreciate your uniqueness. But what is important is that you find your tribe, and within your tribe, that's how you grow, right? And I like to always in the back of my head, I always think about this conversation that I watched Maya Angelou and Oprah Winfrey having one time on YouTube. I forgot the series, but it was on YouTube. And Maya Angelou is telling, Oprah Winfrey was talking about a time that Maya Angelou told her, like, listen, honey, it doesn't matter what room you go into, like, hold yourself with the highest confidence because essentially your crown has been paid for. Right, your ancestors, your parents, the people that have come before you have marched. They've been beaten. They've studied hours. They've saved up capital. Whatever the form of that falls up into that formula of like who you are presently. All of that came with some sort of effort from people in the past, and as a result, you need to hold yourself with that confidence and understand that at a certain point in your life, there's not much you can do to make someone else appreciate you, right? And that kind of leads way to that segue of like, you could just be you in this world. And essentially, if other people don't appreciate you, then that's okay. And a lot of times, what I've learned just as a person of color, navigating corporate America, navigating the entrepreneurial startup ecosystem, is that sometimes, also I would say these differences that people try to signify out as areas of difference are sometimes competitive advantages, right? So these differences sometimes are a lens to a competitive advantage, a way of thinking, a way of doing, a way of approaching that traditionally the masses within that room wouldn't approach a situation. So within that case, because you're approaching it differently, because you come from a different background, because your vocabulary is different, your accent is different, the way you grew up, your preferred eating meal is different. These all lend to a competitive advantage depending on, the situation that you're in. And we try to take all of these different lived experiences and package them up so that students can see that they're actually unique, that they actually are bright, and that the future is one of, opportunity for them. But it's also important for them to adopt a growth mindset within this development as well. And so I'll pause there because I get passionate about this, but we're really we really try to be dynamic in a way that we are educating the students. It's not just technology, it's not just code, it's not just UX. We're really approaching it from a life cycle as well.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. No, I love that. I love that. And, you know, it's the irony of you bringing up that concept of your crown is paid for. I don't know why it triggered, you know, earlier today for me, that phrase self-made, like played in my head. And I don't like that phrase because I think it's absolutely false for many people, not for everybody, because of exactly what you guys are talking about. And in my mind, I was like, you know, there's kind of two forces I give a lot of credit to as to why I could never say I'm self-made. And I don't know if that's like, I don't know if it's 60% on me and then the 40% gets split between those two, but the two would be family and friends who have poured into you to help create the environments for you. Sometimes it can even be tougher environments to see the opportunities, right? So it's not always just like all this love was poured into you. Sometimes, you know, what spurs that growth is actually when you're absolved of certain things or lacking in certain things. The other piece of it though too is society. Like all the people that have come before me to create the spaces where you can walk in these rooms and I'm not getting rocks thrown at me. You know, like you can walk into these schools and it's not lines of white people telling me I don't belong here. Other people paid their dues for me to even be able to breathe this air. So how could I ever say I'm self-made as a result? And I think what you guys are speaking to leans in on that concept. From your vantage point, you know, what has it been like when, so Evin, you're talking a little bit about this, right? Like, let's say a student leaves the program, they go and they apply for a job, they're working somewhere, and it's not a fit, right? When those moments have happened, how do you guys build that person up? Or what are some of the questions, the discovery questions you're asking to learn? Is it just not a cultural fit? Is it not you know, is there other issues there? Like, how do you guys unpack that for the student to help them keep their dignity, keep their pride, and hold their head up high for the next opportunity?
Yes, you want to keep the same format? You can go and then I'll jump in.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. So every single year, we actually disseminate an annual alumni survey. And what this survey does is that it is a tool for us to mine, because we have a lot of alumni now. So the one-to-one conversations are a little bit more difficult to have, but this tool is what it does. It enables us to surface the challenges that our students are facing in computer science programs at 2-year or 4-year universities, as well as the kinds of things that they're experiencing in the workforce. So outside of the demographic information that we are pulling about, you know, their first name, their last name, zip code, family income, stuff like that, we're also getting an accurate view as to like what is actually going on with our students. And so when I think about the students in our program that have gone off into the industry, a lot of times they do report back imposter syndrome. A lot of times they do report back not feeling like it's a culture fit. Some of them have really expressed an interest in entrepreneurship and wanting to build their own products and services. And for those students, what we've done is that we've set aside like, you know, focus groups to say, okay, what is actually going on here that is causing them to say these things? And I will say that in every single situation, I think the entity that is culpable is not the student, right? So there's nothing wrong with the student. I actually think that there is something inherently wrong about HR systems and cultures of inclusion at companies and how those systems create little accountability to ensure that Black and brown people, people from marginalized backgrounds who are operating in spaces of innovation feel like they have a seat at the table. Because if I'm from you know, a disadvantaged community, and now I'm in a company where all these people have attended Ivy League schools, where all these people, you know, have uncles and aunties that have started tech companies that have exited, and now they're here as the engineers that have been coding since 12, but I've only been coding since America on Tech when I was 17, I'm already gonna feel behind. And I think it's incumbent on companies to see our students as culture adds as opposed to culture fits. And I think when the systems that the companies use to onboard students, to include students, to train students, to make them feel like they're included, then I think that that is when that can somewhat be solved. But the real issue here is whether or not at the individual level, if I'm an employee who is working with an American on Tech student, am I seeing this student as an opportunity for me to grow them and develop them? Or am I just thinking they're not a valuable asset to my team? And then on the corporate side is, you know, do I want to make an investment in young people that don't fit a traditional mold? And I think those two entities truly need to be held accountable in like how they actually show up in the space, because the students themselves, since we've worked with them for such a long time, we have an understanding of their characters and the way that they show up and the possibilities that they're and the things that they're able to achieve. But we can't necessarily change the HR systems at companies, right? What we can do is introduce you to very talented people, provide you with an opportunity to hire them, but it's also incumbent on the private sector to share culpability in making sure that they create the environments that are conducive for our young people to succeed. In terms of what we've done though is, you know, we have a network of volunteers, we have a network of mentors, and a network of instructors who really care about our students, are genuinely invested in them. So in the moments where our students are trying to, you know, practice for interviews, making sure that, you know, they're having an issue at work, we're always connecting them with folks who've been there and done that. And all we have to do is send an email to our dedicated volunteer list, and we always get people who are willing to help in some way or form. Another thing that we've done is that this year we're launching affinity groups for our students, right? Specifically for our Black and Brown students, they're gonna be participating in strong intersectional professional development that talks about how do you interview as a person of color and how do you make sure that your resume looks a certain way, you know, based on your experiences as a person of color. And how do we make sure that we talk to you about topics like code switching, right? Because these are things, all things that we've done, but now we're actually professionalizing it more since we're in our 6th year and we have a robust alumni network. So to be honest with you, it's more of right now an art than a science.
Sure.
The tech space is extremely methodological in the way that they approach things, but when you're working with students and you're working in community, you have to design for that set of students. You also have to give them voice to make sure that they are empowered to be a part of that design process. And so for us, it's using you know, our survey tool on an annual basis, and then our informal conversations with alumni to actually inform us of our ways forward, and holding ourselves accountable to making sure those outcomes get achieved.
Yeah, you know, that makes me think of two things, because I'm glad, and it's like you stole the question out of my head in terms of what I was going to ask next, but I was thinking a lot about that idea of affinity groups, right? So first, I'll backtrack a little bit and just and add this one anecdote, and say, you know, Jane Elliott, famous author and professor, but she had those videos from like I believe the 70s and 80s that have gone viral in the recent like 5 to 10 years, where she asked questions like, you know, in front of her all-white class effectively, who in here, you know, thinks that Black people have it worse in America, and people don't really raise their hand. And then she effectively asked them, okay, well, who in here would trade places with a Black person in America? And again, like no one, or stand up if you would, and no one stands up. So she goes, inherently, then you know something's wrong about how Black people are treated in this country. And she does this experiment, like blue-eye, brown-eye tests. And she had already been teaching these young kids, you know, they're her students, for quite a time in the school year. And then one day they walk into class and blue-eyed kids go over here, brown-eyed kids go over here. And she tells the brown-eyed kids effectively, you're not as smart as the blue-eyed kids. You don't belong like the blue-eyed kids belong. And she watched her students, it was like an experiment, right? And she watched her students that were doing very well, that were the brown-eyed students, plummet in terms of their abilities, right? They were now failing tests. They wouldn't even start the homework. It was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And it spoke to the idea that if the dignity isn't there, if the people feel like they're less than because you've told them they are, they will do what people that are less than them do. And she used that example to highlight that America has gravely let down Black and brown people because for 400 plus years, you've been telling them they're not worthy, they're less than. And so, what you were saying initially makes me think of that. But then when I think about the affinity piece of this, a lot of times, especially in the industry we're talking about technology, many times when we get there as Black and brown people, we are one of not many. And so we start practicing this thing called exceptionalism, where we grow into being comfortable being the only one. And if we see someone else who looks like us, it's actually a threat. It's like, yo, I'm the Black guy. Like I did that already, right? How do you guys encourage an environment of, and you guys too, as human beings, do this every single day? I mean, just for folks at home to understand, Evin and Jess live in my inbox, whether that's through IG or through email, with opportunities, things that are happening. We've met up in person to talk about these kind of things. So they live what they're espousing today. How do you impart that on the students you guys are working with to say, hey, look, you have to look out for one another in these spaces in order for us to win as a collective, versus feeling like, feeling threatened, like there's competition there?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. One thing that was told to me very early is that like your network is your net worth. And that was something that was told to me, particularly when I was in high school. And so from a leadership perspective, my interaction with the students are not day to day as it was in the beginning. Our program team handles day to day, but that is something that I try to impart on them, that their network is their net worth. But most importantly, I try to talk to them about the importance of having a network that is diverse. And I use it from a more tangible perspective of what is relatable to them. We're collectively in this class, there's about 30 of us. Within this 30 students, you have about 12 to 20 different high schools across the 5 boroughs, right? So the access that you have as a student in this high school in Brooklyn may be a little different than the access that a student has in the Bronx and in Queens and Staten Island. But collectively, if you build that network, you can all share that information together. So as a unit, you're now able to operate in an advancement together, right? In a more advanced stage together. So, through the conversations that I have with the students, more so now, like in, guest speeches or one-on-one from a mentor-mentee relationships with the ones I adapt, these are the things that I try to coach them on. And I know for truth that it works, because this is what was told to me, and this is what I've applied in my life, right? Like, I know my network is my net worth. But most importantly, I know that, collectively, right, America on Tech is successful because of Jessica and Evin and our team and our board of directors. America on Tech wouldn't be successful if it was just Evin operating in a silo, right? So again, that is a real life use example of like me knowing collectively what I'm saying is truth. And I try to install that in the students very early in high school, but through the trajectory of them being in high school all the way through, college and with us through AOT, like those soft things of like understanding that and understanding the collective power as a unit. And Jess, would you add anything there?
Yeah, and there are also there are also very intentional things that we do in the design of our programs. Like all of our programs are competition-based and project-based, and the students are not working on individual projects, they're working on group projects. And so they're learning the value of teamwork, they're learning the value of being an accountable team member through our programs. I would also say that very early on in our programs, they learn during student orientation what our values are, and our values are impact, growth mindset, community, and respect. And part of our community value is that you understand that regardless of whether you're from the Bronx or you're from Brooklyn, or you're Black or you're brown, or you went to a summer program at Brown, but at the end of the day, you're still in New York City, you're still in high school, and you're still very much in need of support wherever it is that you can get it. And I think that reframing that and actually having the design of the program itself forced them to have to like get to know each other and then also respect each other and work on things together. They automatically start building those relationships with one another. Another cool thing about our program is we're not just tech, we're also taking the students to really amazing site visits. Now our site visits are happening virtually with our corporate partners. But, even through our field trips and our career days with students, we're taking them to the NBC Universals of the world, the Faxes of the world, the Googles of the world, and on the buses and on the trains, they are getting to know each other during those sessions. And so they really already build a community. And the last thing I'll say is that we also use technology to build that community as well. So all of our classrooms for the students are available online. And so the cool thing about classrooms is that they allow you to post different resources. And so you'll notice that there are threads going on all of the time where students are sharing scholarships with one another, deadlines with one another. And that doesn't just happen for the current students, that also happens for the alumni of our programs as well. So I think the design of the program itself also lends them to have to be accountable to making sure that they are not seeing one person as the magical student, right? At the end of the day, we're all cut from the same cloth, and some of us may have gotten more opportunities than others, but at the end of the day, it's incumbent on us to lean on each other, because even if you don't want to do it from a social perspective, from a moral perspective, and from just a good business perspective, you never know who's going to be able to hire you at the end of the day. So sometimes, even if you have to talk to them like that, they'll be like, oh, okay, this person maybe will one day employ me, so maybe I should be kind. I think that also resonates with them too.
Nah, for sure, for sure. And what you were saying made me think a lot about something Tom had mentioned earlier, where he mentioned that for GA, the age group tends to be mid-20s to mid-30s. Your age group tends to be, grade school students, high school students going into the college or the workforce. This was like 4 years ago. It was at launch, the big event that Jason Calacanis throws, the angel investor out of the Bay Area. And I remember meeting Mohamed Massaquoi, who was a receiver for the Cleveland Browns at the time. We connected, it became really cool. And I was talking to him about getting athletes to invest in tech. And he was like, he's like, it's funny, it doesn't seem like it should be that hard because these guys have liquid money, right? He's like, but he's like, outside of, if you're LeBron James, you're LeBron James. Nobody's gonna question what you do off the court. He's like, but he's like, look at what happened with Melo, really. With Melo, he had, I think it was M7 Ventures, and was getting a little bit of heat for not being too focused on the court, was focusing on other things. But we say all that to say, he said what he was finding, and I think Evin, I think you mentioned this earlier, he was finding that a lot of the players still had a very, very much a user mentality, like user of tech, not a creator's mentality. So before we could even get them to the point of investing in technology, he had this idea of just boarding them on buses and taking them to all the Bay Area, the big corporations like the Twitters and Facebooks of the world, and touring these facilities, learning what it takes to build these technologies, so we're not always consuming it, but instead we're helping create it. And so I love the parallels there with a lot of what you guys said tonight. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Tom back on to join us, because we have Q&A here, but the questions touch on for both organizations. So I want to bring you all together to close out here today. The first question I have is, both organizations, this is from the audience, by the way, but it's both organizations mentioned how tech is not limited to the tech industry. Tech impacts all roles and industries. What are some seemingly non-traditional jobs or industries people who have received tech training are getting?
Yeah, I can give you an example. Like, I have a friend who works in library, and she's taken her data science background, and she is in charge of making sure that libraries are using a strong data collection strategy in order to file and organize books online. And so I think that for me is like an area, when you think of a library, I think sometimes people think that's ancient, right? It's like very anti-tech, but that is an example of how I've seen like an industry that's a little bit not as forward moving, using a role in technology.
Awesome. And I'll throw these questions out, and then whoever jumps in it first can tackle it, and then we'll keep moving, because we have a lot of questions here, which is great. So I appreciate that answer there. So someone else asked, and I guess this would be geared more towards Tom on this one. During another GA event, someone said that they believe the new illiteracy will be an inability to code. Do you agree? Why or why not?
I don't agree. We're allowed to disagree at General Assembly. But I do think that there is, not everybody's going to need to know how to code, right? Like to be successful in the world of work. I think what is going to be really important is to be able to, and it, Evan and Jessica spoke about this so eloquently, like you have to have a vocabulary to understand these concepts, right? Because they bump up into every job, right? You need to be able to understand how the internet works, because chances are you're going to be working with teams that are actually sort of doing that work, right? Regardless of where you sit in an organization, right? And so I think it becomes less about sort of like the pure, like I took high school chemistry. I was not good at high school chemistry. I don't use high school chemistry, right, in my day-to-day job, but it helped me to understand how the world works, right? And it gave me an opportunity to try it out. And if that had become my passion, then, and I was really good at it, then I could have pursued it. It just wasn't, right? But was that still valuable? Of course it was. And I think that so many of these sort of the being able to just sort of have some vocabulary and frameworks to understand how the world works now is really important for everybody. So to me, it's not about, knowing how to code, but it is having some vocabulary around it and some understanding of it to be just an informed citizen, an informed consumer, and, full stop, right? But it also is going to be meaningful for your job. Jessica, Evan, I don't know if you agree.
No, I definitely agree. And Evin, you jump in too. I think for me, like, you don't read to just sit and read books all day, right? Like, you don't learn to read to do that. You learn to read so that you can do other things with reading. And I think people think that coding is about developing products and services. And for me, it's about computational thinking, right? It's what are the skill sets that you acquire when you learn something like this that will enable you to do other things like problem solving, like thinking critically. But
Yeah, I think, and you talked about, so both Tom and Jessica are spot on. And then Ofo, when you asked a question similarly, like, how do we, what is our approach to informing and educating the kids, is like, what Jessica was saying is exactly that. We tell the students, like, hey, you're not just learning the code, but let's dissect what are all these transferable skills that you can take anywhere that you decide to go, right? Like, okay, troubleshooting, testing, right? Like collaboration, how to detect problems, how to hit a roadblock and then do research to figure out how to overcome that roadblock. Like, that isn't just going to help a person be successful in the technology industry. That is transferable to every aspect of life, right? And so these are the concepts, and this is the information that we try to deploy to the students to make them understand that, like, this is a hard skill you can learn. You can either find a career path or a major that is closely aligned to it, or you can take what you're learning here and apply to any aspect, and it will enhance you, right? And so I think that's a good way to sum it up.
Awesome. And then for this question, I'll ask this in this way. What's been, and any of you can take this question. What's been a success story that I'm gonna say has left you emotional from the work you do?
Yeah. So most recently, and we have tons, but the biggest one I would say with COVID was one of our students. He's actually an alum of our program. He's actually now doing an apprenticeship with Amazon, and he was just rehired by America on Tech currently to be a peer mentor, which is basically a teacher assistant in our classroom. With his skills, his mom was having some troubles because of COVID, and she runs a daycare center, right? So a parent that was closed down. So what the student decided to do was to develop a website to help his mom with the daycare center, so she could think about other avenues to continue to help the families that she was serving without it being in person. So there's like, that was one of the big things in the aha moments for us, for our students. Like, okay, like, you can be entrepreneurial, you can help your family, you can find a job. These are all the things that are great outputs of you learning these skill sets. But most importantly, like, as an individual that was raised by a single mother, like, that hit me to the core of like understanding that what we've invested into the student reinvested into his mom and into the family, right? And so that's just one of many. And I don't want to monopolize the time, but Jessica, if you want to jump in and share, or some of your thoughts there. and others?
Yeah, I mean, so one of my favorite American Tech stories, I have a lot, but there's one story where I call them the McCullum family. So the McCullum family, back in 2016, Samara McCullum came to our program and she did Tech 360, which was our introductory course. She did every single program with American Tech up until graduating, and now she is the president of our alumni council this year. She's attending Carnegie Mellon through our program. She got an internship with Deutsche Bank, and she's just doing amazing things, and she's majoring in information systems. But not only that, she basically enrolled all of her brothers and sisters into the program now, right? So we have Samara, we have Riley, we have Raquel, and they are all participating in the American Tech program. So for us, we're seeing like a generational cycle of students who are coming into our programs, and each and every one of them have also gone through our programs up to this point, every single one of them. So it's really an amazing thing to see that you can have like an effect within the family, even past just one student.
Definitely.
If I could just speak to that quickly, and I know
absolutely.
we're close to time, but there are a lot of students who fit this profile, but I have one student specifically in mind to like super smart, super talented, wanted to do coding, ended up in a community college program that didn't offer anything, dropped out, had some debt, was working as a photographer's assistant, and came through one of our programs. And I remember like the instructor being like, that guy is going to be making 6 figures in 1 year, I guarantee you, right? He's like one of the most effective people. So he sort of he faced some barriers because he didn't have a 4-year degree, right? So he got a lot of doors slammed in his face and had to like take on some apprenticeships and internships. And then when he did get a full-time job as a senior React developer, you know, the offer was so high, he was like skeptical of it, right? And so like talked to our career coach, like came in and was like, is this real? And what I think about, just to what Jessica was naming just there, you know, so now he's been in that role for several years now, I'm sure his salary has gone up even further, is that like that builds intergenerational wealth, that helps build community wealth, that also contributes to the tax base, right? Because most of us pay our taxes, right? And you know, also just contributes to the economy, right? So he was working in a relatively low skilled job as compared to his talent, right? And now he's able to sort of unleash his talent to sort of contribute to his business, which is then helping to then contribute to the overall economy, right? And when you think about the ways that especially Black and brown folks have been sort of excluded from that sort of wealth creation and access to capital, that's where programs like America in Tech, and to probably a lesser extent GA, can start to sort of break those barriers, because Jessica, every single member of that family goes into a tech-enabled or tech-related field, right? What does that do for their kids? What does that do for their grandkids? What does that do for their community, right? And I think that that's where the power in a lot of this lies, is being able to sort of like get us out of the notion that there's one way to do things and one way to be successful in the world and one way to learn and to show up.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me just make sure. Okay. All right, we can actually end on this question. Okay, so I just want to make sure, because I know the boss is telling me how much time we got here. So I got 2 questions, but I think we are just dressed up against time. So I want to be respectful of our amazing guests and also the attendees at home. I will read them out loud, and look, Tom already threw out his email address. I'm going to have American Art and Tech also give out their connection stuff too. But if you guys want to ask these questions to them directly, one was a consistent criticism of education programs or no alumni engagement. What does that look like for both of your organizations? And the second question was 3 panelists. What has been the single catalyst that has pushed you to be successful in the tech field? Who or what was a driver or motivator? And so for the folks that did ask those questions, I encourage you to reach out to Evin, to Tom, to Jessica directly. Jess, Ev, where can people find you guys online, and how can they stay connected?
They can find us at America on Tech. They can find us on LinkedIn. We have a website, Instagram, Twitter. That's the handle, at America on Tech. You can also find Evin and I on LinkedIn, just Jessica Santana. And then Evin is Evin Robinson on LinkedIn.
Awesome. I appreciate you all for coming out today. As always, the WYL Take Ownership podcast is all about taking ownership of your mental, your economics, and your community. Thank you to Amanda. Thank you to John. Thank you to Franz at home for helping us make this a reality. Y'all have a great evening. And of course, thank you to our amazing guests, Tom, Jess, and Ev. Have a good one, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.